What is going on? It is 21st Century Lens back with the book of the week, and this week we are discussing what is undoubtedly my favorite book of the year so far, Dungeon Crawler Carl. I've played video games my whole life, predominantly MMORPGs, and as I was reading this book, there were obviously so many games that I felt he pulled inspiration from, some more than others. And I want to talk about that a little bit, some of the references I noticed and what games they might have been from, because it was so fun to read this book and be like, oh, that was Elden Ring, or oh, that was MMORPGs, or that was Street Fighter, or that was Dungeons and Dragons. I think the brilliance of this book and what made it so fun, especially for gamers, was something that you could do in novel form that you would not be able to do in a video game. Is he incorporated elements of like 20 different games into one novel, whereas with a video game, you can't branch out that far. For example, if you're like Ghost of Tsushima and you're an open world story game, you can't necessarily have it all. You can't have skills, Dungeons and Dragons check, your own customizable character, race and class selection. You know, if you're playing The Witcher, for example, you are The Witcher. You don't get to choose or create your character. But because this was written in novel form and he controls the narrative, he was like, I can pull in as many elements of video games as I want. One question I have that I'd be very curious to hear someone else's opinion on is if you were a non-gamer who read this, if it was enjoyable. Because I think, and this is my prediction, I think if a non-gamer read this, they'd have a hard time picturing what I think Matt Dinniman was speaking to the gamers to picture. So I think Fog of War, I'll get into all the terminology that he used in just a second, but Fog of War, as an example, is a gaming term where the map isn't completely shown to the player unless you go through that area and unlock it. He described that in there, but you know, as a gamer, I can easily picture, oh, pulling up my map and Carl can't see where he's at because of the Fog of War. As a gamer, that's super easy to understand. I'd be curious how a non-gamer is picturing some of the terminology that I'll cover in just a second in their head. So if you are a non-gamer and you're watching this review, leave a comment down below if you've read it and if you enjoyed it, if it was hard to pick up on some of the terminology, if you had to look things up, things like that. Before jumping into all of the terminology and all of the games that he might have pulled inspiration from and the correlations that I made, let me just give a quick summary of the book. The book follows Carl, of course, and before the Earth collapses, his internal world is already collapsing. He's going through a breakup, and then an intergalactic space conglomerate smashes all of Earth down. Millions upon millions upon millions, billions die. And those that were not underneath the surface, where a building collapsed and crushed them, had a limited amount of time to get to a portal. And if they made it to the portal, congratulations, you are now a dungeon crawler. And so the way to get through the dungeon and through various levels of the dungeon is to level your skills up, be that pummeling, be that kicking, be that axe throwing, whatever you have, whatever it is that you can do to level your skills up, you can do, and your life becomes a video game, and you are crawling through dungeons trying to make it through the levels. So that is the fun plot environment that you are thrown into. But without spoiling anything, let's now jump to some terminology that Matt Dinniman used that I believe pulled from specific video games. Now, to start, there were obvious correlations to an entire genre, which is MMORPGs. In MMORPGs, you create your own character and you start very weak at level 1, and throughout your journey within the world, you are leveling up, doing various things. If it's RuneScape, you might be chopping trees, you might be using dragon axes to level your melee skills. If it's World of Warcraft, you might be a specific class, so he pulls that in. There is a companion in the book named Princess Donut, who is everyone's favorite character. She is a talking cat who is focusing on magic and shooting missiles. And so the first and most obvious correlation to a video game is an entire genre where you are choosing to use specific skill sets to level those skills, be it mage, be it barbarian, be it warrior, be it rogue, etc. Carl chooses a more melee-focused path, while his companion Donut chooses a magic path. I've played World of Warcraft for many, many years. going on a decade now, predominantly playing a rogue where I'm stealthing around. Neither of the main characters, at least as of yet, are doing that. He's more of a barbarian and the cat is more of a mage. But anyone who has played MMORPGs will have fun with this book. That same feeling you get when you log on to an MMORPG and you're building your character and getting better is basically what it felt like, which is very rare with a book. To open up the pages and be like, I can't wait to see what happens with Carl and what skills he's going to level and what other craziness is going to unfold. So you're kind of watching an MMORPG narrative unfold in novel form, and it's just so much fun. There are many games that have boss fights with boss runes, but one contemporary game that I think he clearly pulled inspiration from is Elden Ring, which has oftentimes doors that signify this is the boss room. And there are many boss fights in Dungeon Crawler Carl where there is a magical door or something where it's like, okay, on the map I can see a big circle behind that door. There's probably a boss there. I think a lot of people, when they see that in text form, they're picturing something from Elden Ring, and you know it's going to be kind of a crazy fight behind that door. A little bit of meta in the book was his call out of Street Fighter. So I was reading the way they introduce boss fights, and it puts like squares like boom versus boom, like Dungeon Crawler Carl and Princess Donut versus boom. And as I was reading that description, I was thinking, oh, that's Street Fighter. He's pulling on Street Fighter. And then kind of a little bit of meta, he was speaking to the readers and he said, in his head, he was like, man, this is like straight out of Street Fighter. And if I had just read 2 more sentences, I would have seen that. Another obvious tie for Matt Dinniman was Dungeons and Dragons. Princess Donut had a high charisma skill as an example. And so he called them checks, straight out of Dungeons and Dragons, where she could manipulate NPCs through charisma checks. So cool that he got to pull all these elements of tabletop RPGs, video games into novel form. And then the other games, plural kind of a genre, is open world games. He references, like I said, the Fog of War. The first thing that came to my mind was Ghost of Tsushima, a recent game I played, where you can't see parts of the map if you haven't been there. Skyrim, I think, has a Fog of War. So many open world games have Fog of War. And like I said, those are just some obvious examples. Clearly, many games utilize these functions, but I think contextually, those were some that he definitely pulled from. Elden Ring for sure, the MMORPG genre for sure, and then Dungeons and Dragons, and then many other elements of other games. Now, I alluded to this already, but I want to talk about some terms that he used in the book that I'd be curious if a non-gamer could understand. I think he added some context whenever he used a gamer term only, like NPC, which stands for non-playable character. He would say something along those lines, but I'm still very curious if a non-gamer would have picked up the terminology. So off the top, NPC was a common term that he used. There was Fog of War, which I've talked about in this video a little bit. He brought in the concept of mounts. I won't say what their mount was or what the mounts are in the book, but mounts are when you can ride something faster than just running on your 2 legs. So that was cool. Dungeons and Dragons checks, class and race selection. So that is something that comes straight out of an MMORPG. There was a tutorial island or a tutorial level. Okay, everyone would understand that one, but still pretty cool that he incorporated it into the book. One thing that both gamers and non-gamers could understand, but just a kind of funny call out for myself, was this book is played in what's known as hardcore mode in MMORPGs, which is kind of a new fad of like the last 5 to 10 years, where old games, specifically RuneScape and World of Warcraft, that have been figured out, so to say, where people who've been playing them for so many years, who have gotten so good, wanted to up the ante for their character. And so one gameplay mechanic that emerged is what's called hardcore mode. So in World of Warcraft or RuneScape, as an example, you can create a character where if you die, your character's kaput, deleted, done, which is new to the gaming sphere of the last 5 to 10 years. And funny enough, this novel takes place in what's called hardcore mode, where if Carl dies in this video game that he's now playing, or being in this reality show, rather, of the intergalactic universe, watching them try to survive these dungeons, he's kaput. So another cool callback, he got to incorporate hardcore mode into his novel because Carl can't die. There were debuffs in this book. I think that might be one that's kind of hard to understand for the general public, which is a curse or something that gets put on your character where you are for a set amount of time debuffed. So you might have a bleed effect on you where for the next 10 minutes you're losing health because you're bleeding. You know what? I just explained it and I think most people could understand that, so maybe it's not too hard to understand. But I don't think someone who reads the word debuff would immediately understand what that means. Maybe I'm wrong. Two more off the top of my head would be hilarious enough that the book is pay to win, which is also a novel concept of the last 10 years or so, or probably 15 years, I don't know, where you can incorporate microtransactions into video games where you can purchase loot boxes to get better items. He circumvented the purchasing of loot boxes, at least in this first book, but hilarious enough, patrons of intergalactic viewers who are watching Carl can purchase loot boxes for the characters that they're watching. And so he got to throw in a funny little nod to pay to win, where if you're entertaining enough and you have enough money, in this case if someone else has enough money, they can support you and make it so you pay to win. It's not entirely fair. The dungeon's not fair. Life's not fair. And in gaming, in 2026, as unfortunate as it is, a lot of games are pay to win, and that just sucks. Okay, enough with all of the gamer terminology. Now let's talk just a little bit about the main characters. I'll talk about three in particular. Of course, Carl and Donut. I think he did a brilliant job of juxtaposing their personalities and creating two very different people, both of whom you love. You've got Carl, who's kind of the strict main character. He's got high moral value. He makes the right decision. He's helping people. And then you've got Donut, also extremely high moral character, but very quirky, very funny, loves the attention of the intergalactic personnel and people watching. And she's just the hilarious offset to Carl, who's a bit more serious. Still, he's got hilarious one-liners. He's funny. You love him. You're rooting for him. But Donut serves as the comedic valve, the comedic relief of the book. She's always just caring about entertainment. She's funny, but she's also very loving. Like, she puts on this front where she's very tough, but secretly she nuzzles up to Carl at night, and you just end up rooting so much for these two main characters. And then there are other characters to talk about, but the third one that I would bring up is Mordecai, which is sort of he moves the narrative along. He is the tutorial guild master, but he's starting to build in some backstory to Mordecai, who they go to for advice, and he can provide information on the levels that they're on. So he serves this purpose of like explaining the world to Carl and Donut, but really Mordecai's explaining the world to the reader. But he's also kind of building in this story for Mordecai as well. So I'm very excited to see where Mordecai's story goes as well, although he's not a main character. It's Carl and Donut. As far as rating the character work by Matt Dinniman, I give this 5 out of 5. You fall in love with the characters, you're rooting for them. Obviously, you want them to keep going deeper and deeper in the dungeon so that they can live. And yeah, characters, super fun, super fun. Let's now talk a little bit about the plot, the pacing, and the environment. I think he builds a super fun gaming world. He explains the HUD and like what the characters are seeing on their screen or in their eyes very well. One thing that I struggle with books like this and a previous book that I just read, Pir and Nessie, where a main character was trapped in a labyrinth. What I struggle with in those environments is feeling claustrophobic, where it's like in my head, I'm picturing being stuck in a dungeon for days and days and days. And in Pir and Nessie, for example, you're trapped in a labyrinth for days and days and days. For me, I can start to feel claustrophobic. Like, man, I kind of want the main characters to be out in a world where there's open world, not to use another gaming term. But overall, I think he does a good job. You know, you're not just stuck in these four walls of a dark dungeon. You know, they get teleported places and there's other things going on. But in general, I'll give it a 4 out of 5, only because I personally can feel claustrophobic at times when the environment is caged in for too long. And that's kind of the whole point of this book. Don't let that point doc scare you away from reading this book. Like I said, it's the most fun I've had reading a book in a long time. And crazy enough, this started out as a self-published, indie publisher, I believe. So very cool to see his success. It's very well written. It's hilarious. You'll be smiling the whole time. In terms of pacing, the pacing was super fast. So buckle up because you're getting into boss fights, you're leveling up, you're punching things in the face, crazy things are happening. It's an intergalactic reality TV show where everyone's watching and they want their followers and numbers to go up of viewers. And yeah, I call a lot of books roller coaster rides. This one is a literal roller coaster ride. You are just flying the whole time. So if you're looking for a fast-paced adventure MMORPG where it's just swang and bang, things are getting punched in the face, you're leveling up, and it's just kind of pure fun and chaos the whole time, this is the book for you. You're not going to get, you know, a slow burn with Dungeon Crawler Carl. So pacing, I think that's the point of the book. I'm gonna give it 5 out of 5 on pacing because that's kind of the whole point. It's fun, it's chaotic, and it just keeps going. And then ending and payoff for book 1, I will give this a 3 out of 5. And the reason I'm docking 2 points for this is the ending is going to force you to get the second book. It's not like you could just read this first book and he tied a bow on it and it was a good story in and of itself. No, the story just kind of ends right at a specific point, and if you want to keep going, you're going to have to buy the second book, and that's fine. I've kind of expected that, but just know if you're going into this book, you're not going to get a full circular story by the final page. You're going to have to read the other books to find out what happens to Carl and Donut. That's fine, but I'm going to dock a point because it's not a book that could even stand alone if you wanted it to. I know it's a series. I know it was intended to be a series, but I've read many books where if you were just to read the first in the series, you'd be like, that was sweet. I still want to read the second, but at least there was payoff. And I don't think you get that payoff in this, but still very, very fun. I'm buying the second book today. Can't wait to keep going, but do have to dock a few points just for kind of the abrupt ending right at a cliffhanger, really, without kind of tying any of the loose ends off at all. Overall, I give this book a 4 out of 5. Like I said, I only docked a point on the environment feeling a bit claustrophobic for me. You know, you're kind of trapped the whole time, and that's the whole point of the book. That's the whole plot and environment. Deal with it. And then just kind of not having any of the loose ends tied off at all. We kind of got all of the plot points, all of the characters created. I'm invested in all of the stories. There's 6 different subplots going on, and he didn't tie a bow on kind of any of them to give you a payoff, but that's the whole point. It's like a long series, and I can't wait to see what happens to the characters, but do have to kind of dock a point just for no payoff relative to the first book. Thank you so much for being here. That is my breakdown of Dungeon Crawler Carl. I'm looking forward to next week's video. Please consider becoming a subscriber as I get started here on YouTube. I want to interact with the community. I want to meet some people. I want to join some Discords. Let's get it going. Thank you so much and talk to you next week.